Welcome to Lawishhh, your source for all things law and politics. So today's going to be an interesting one. We're diving back into a case 2004, which was similar to what's happening now with the proceedings in the ICJ, which was titled Legal Consequences of the Construction of the Wall in the Occupied Palestine Territory. Before we dive into this sort of case, let's begin with a brief history into the ICJ. So the International Court of Justice, which is commonly known as the ICJ, is the principal judicial organ of the UN. Established in 1945, its primary mission was to settle legal disputes between states, providing advisory opinions on legal questions referred to by the UN General Assembly, Special Council, or other specialized organizations. Now, let's move on to the heart of discussion, the case brought by South Africa to the ICJ. In this case, requested as an advisory opinion from the ICJ through Resolution ES 10-14, adopted on 8th of December 2003. It was during the 10th Emergency Special Session of the UN Assembly. This case revolved around the construction of the wall by Israel in the occupied Palestinian territory, including in and around East Jerusalem. South Africa asked the ICJ to consider the legal consequences of this wall, taking into account international law, including the Fourth Geneva Convention of 1949, as well as the relevant Security Council and General Assembly resolutions. So the question is jurisdiction. So before diving into the details of the case, the ICJ has to establish its jurisdiction, just like any other court in Australia or in the world. It's determined that the General Assembly had the authority to request an advisory opinion under Article 96, Paragraph 1 of the UN Charter, which is this massive charter, and that's the main principle they use. So the question posed by the General Assembly fell within the competence of the General Assembly. So the court concluded that the request for the opinion was legitimate. That's the first thing they must do. Again, I can't stress that enough. Importantly, the court highlighted the advisory opinion scope extended beyond a bilateral dispute between Israel and Palestine. He held that the subject matter of the request concerned broader international concerns and also the United Nations itself. So, to address this case, it was one of the first ones brought for the Palestinian people was the ICJ has to consider the relevant principles of international law. It referenced several legal foundations. The first one, as previously mentioned, was the UN Charter. The court noted that the UN Charter prohibits the threat or use of force and emphasizes the illegality of any territorial acquisition achieved by such means. And this goes into the second point, which is the principle of self-determination. The principle of self-determination enshrined in the Charter was reaffirmed. It is a fundamental concept in international law, emphasizing the rights of people to determine their own political statuses, pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. And this was a big issue. This has been a big issue since 1948. So in the international humanitarian law, the ICJ cited the Hague Regulations of 1907 and the Fourth Geneva Convention of 1949, emphasizing by Israel during the 1967 conflict, which was one of the first Arab-Israel war. These legal frameworks protect citizens and civilians in armed conflicts and prohibit the establishment of settlements. The international human rights law. So the court recognized that certain human rights instruments, such as the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights and the International Covenant of Economic, Social, and Cultural rights applied in the occupied Palestinian territory. So with the legal framework in mind, the ICJ proceeded to assert that the construction of the wall concluded that the construction violated numerous international laws, including the same principle, the right to self-determination. The construction of the wall severely impeded the Palestinian people's exercise of their right to self-determination, violating Israel's obligation to respect that right, a human rights violation. The wall and its associated regime contained in the Hague Regulations and Fourth Geneva Convention impacting daily lives of the Palestinian inhabitants, including their freedom of movement, access to basic necessities like work, health, education, and adequate standard of living. So it goes down through more important part, which was the demographic changes. The ICJ noted that the war, coupled with the establishment of settlements, was altering the democratic composition of occupied Palestinian territory, which further violated international law. So there's obviously these consequences and international obligations that the ICJ concluded by outlining several legal consequences. Immediate actions by Israel. Israel was obliged to cease the construction of the wall, dismantle parts of the occupied Palestinian territory, and repel or render ineffective all legislative and regulatory acts related to this construction. Reparations. Israel was required to make reparations for all damages suffered by individuals occupied and affected by the war construction. The recognition by other states. All states were obliged not to recognize a legal situation resulting from the war construction and not to aid or assist in maintaining the situation, the protection of humanitarian law. State parties by the Fourth Geneva Convention were called upon to ensure compliance by Israel international humanitarian law. In closing, ICJ's advisory opinion was advisory in the case of the legal consequences of destruction of a war in the occupied Palestinian territory underscores the importance international of law in resolving complex international disputes. Also highlights the ICJ's role in interpreting and applying these laws to promote peace, justice, and the rule of law in the international community. Thank you for joining us on this journey to the significant ICJ case. More legal insights. Don't forget to subscribe, Lawishhh, and any other cases you want me to summarize or any current issues, please drop a comment and I would love to do that for you guys.